The door latched behind me with a soft click that sounded too final for a place that pretended to be a normal store. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The hallway smelled like plastic and old cleaner, and it felt wrong that it was so quiet. I stood there with my hand still on the knob, already wishing I could rewind 30 seconds. At the counter, I had forced the code phrase out of my mouth like I was reading a password I did not believe in. The cashier did not blink. He only nodded once like I had asked where the bathrooms were, then stepped around the corner and led me down this narrow back hallway. He never asked my name. He never asked if I was sure. He stopped at a booth with a paper sign taped across the door, closed for maintenance. The letters were thick and angry. He pointed at it anyway. Another booth a few feet away had the same sign, like the store wanted to look broken on purpose. The cashier's face stayed blank, calm, practiced. He walked away before I could ask any question that mattered. Inside my booth, a screen played a video with the sound turned low, just enough to make the air feel crowded. The door shut behind me. The lock slid into place. I turned and saw the wall panel, and then I saw the hole. It was not hidden. It was not subtle. It was just there at the height where it could not be an accident. My chest tightened. I told myself I could still leave. I could pull the door open, walk past the cashier, and pretend I had taken a wrong turn. My body did not move. I leaned closer, not to look through, but to confirm it was real. The edge of the opening looked worn, used, cleaned, used again. I kept my eyes fixed on the wall around it because the worst part was the thought of seeing someone's face. If I saw them, it would become a real person. If I did not, it would stay like a dare. One choice, do not look, changed everything. Then something moved on the other side. A quick shadow. A brief, wet sound. For half a second I saw a tongue press into the opening like a signal that someone had been waiting. In that moment, I understood the question I had not wanted to ask myself. When you could not see the other person at all, did you still feel in control, or did the moment control you? I stood there shaking, and I did not look. He was about to find out that anonymity could feel amazing and terrifying. So here was the situation. I had been recently divorced, lonely, and touch-starved. The divorce had been final for months, but the silence in my apartment still felt new. The kind of silence that made every small sound too loud, the refrigerator click, the heat turning on, my phone vibrating in my hand with messages that were not for me. Valentine's Day hit like a joke I could not laugh at. Couples had plans. Friends had someone to text. I had a couch, a dim lamp, and a feeling that my own skin did not fit right. I had told people I was fine. I even believed it most days. I handled the paperwork. I split the furniture. I learned how to stop checking my old photos, but my body kept count of what my mind tried to ignore. It had been almost a year since I had sex. Not because I had become some better, calmer person. It was because I did not know how to start over, and I did not want the risk of rejection to stack on top of everything else I had already lost. That night I scrolled until my thumb went numb. Happy posts, dinner pictures, cheap jokes about romance. Then the ads showed up like my phone could smell weakness. Dating apps, escorts, messages from accounts with no faces. I deleted and reopened and deleted again. I wanted comfort, but I wanted it without being seen. That was the truth I hated most. I told myself I was straight. I had always been straight. I liked women. I had a marriage that proved it, at least on paper. But alone in that room, labels did not feel like armor. They felt like rules I was about to break. The longer I sat there, the more my thoughts turned into a tight knot of need and shame. I wanted someone to want me. I also wanted to disappear the second it was over. I tried to solve it the way I solved everything else, with a search bar. At first it was harmless, just late-night curiosity. Are glory holes real? Do adult stores still have booths? Is it a myth or an old joke? I expected to find threads full of people laughing or warnings about scams. Instead, I found detail, specific detail. People talked about places like they were talking about a restaurant, parking, hours, which door to use, what not to wear, how to act like you belonged. Then I found a post about a local adult video store I had driven past 100 times and never entered. The same brick building, the same dark windows. The comments said there was a back hallway with private booths. The comments also said you did not just walk in and ask. You said a phrase. A code phrase. It sounded stupid. It sounded made up. It also sounded safe in a way that scared me. Because if there was a script, then I would not have to be myself. I could be a body with no history, a person with no divorce, no awkward explanations, no first dates, just a moment. The post said it was free and just for fun. No money exchanged. No names, no questions, like a secret door hidden in plain sight. I stared at the address on my screen until my eyes burned. It was close enough that I could be there in 10 minutes. Close enough that I could go and still pretend later that it had been a dream. My phone dimmed, then lit again when I touched it, like it was waiting for me to decide. And in that light, a private fantasy stopped feeling private. It turned into a real place I could drive to, a real counter where I could say those words out loud, a real back hallway with a door that might already be expecting me. I told myself it was only research until it was not. I sat there with my phone close to my face, like the light from it could hide me. I searched the same question in different ways, hoping one version would give me an answer that let me feel normal. Are they real? Are they safe? Who even did that? Every time I hit search, I expected to feel disgust and stop. Instead, I felt something worse. Hope. The first links were jokes and shock stories. Then I found long threads that read like instructions. People described rules. Do not talk. Do not look. Do not ask questions. They wrote it like a game, but also like a confession. Some comments warned about cameras. Some warned about cops. Some warned about diseases. But mixed in with the warnings were calm voices saying it was common and simple, and that the whole point was that you could walk away with no name attached to it. That was the part my brain grabbed like a handle. After the divorce, everything felt attached to my name, my failure, my loneliness, the way people looked at me like I was unfinished. I did not want another situation where someone could decide I was not worth it. I did not want the slow, painful process of trying to impress a stranger just to earn a touch. The idea that touch could happen without a conversation sounded like relief, and it also sounded like a trap. I clicked anyway. I went deeper, page after page, like I was trying to prove I was not going to do it by learning how it worked. I read about adult stores that still had back booths. I read about places that kept it quiet, pretending the booths were just for videos, like it was still the early 2000s. I saw people arguing about what was real and what was a myth, and I noticed how confident the ones sounded who had been there. Their certainty made my stomach turn, because it meant the door existed. Then I saw my city. Someone mentioned a local adult video store by the highway. They described the front like it was nothing, just a counter and shelves, and then a hallway that staff could open for you if you asked the right way. The comment did not say, "Ask for the glory hole." It said there was a cover story. It said you were supposed to say a code phrase. I read the phrase 3 times. It sounded harmless. It sounded like a stupid joke between strangers. It also sounded like a key. My thumb hovered over the screen. My head started doing math that did not add up. I told myself the phrase could mean anything. I told myself maybe it was old and no one used it anymore. I told myself I could walk in, say it, and if the cashier looked confused, I could laugh and leave. No harm, no risk, just curiosity. But my body reacted like it already believed. I opened a map and checked the distance. 10 minutes, maybe less with no traffic. I checked the hours, still open. I imagined walking into that store and being seen and my face burned. I imagined running into someone I knew and my stomach dropped. I imagined the cashier laughing or worse, nodding like it was routine. I clicked back to the thread and reread the part that said it was free and just for fun. That line made it feel casual, like it was not a big decision, like it was only a strange kind of entertainment. No money meant no transaction, and my mind tried to pretend that made it cleaner. But the more I stared at the words, the more I realized the real price was not cash. It was what I would have to admit to myself after. My thoughts started splitting in two. One part of me said this was dangerous and desperate, that I was not that person, that I would regret it. The other part said I had already been alone for months, and I was tired of being strong in a silent room. It said I deserved something that felt good, even if it was stupid. It said it would be quick. It said no one would ever know. I looked at the time again, like it mattered, like the clock could make the decision for me. By the time I closed the browser, I already knew I might go. And that was the scariest part, because the decision had not felt like a decision at all. It had felt like gravity. I stood up, keys in my hand, and I realized I was already practicing the code phrase under my breath, hearing how it would sound when I said it to a stranger who might not react at all. I parked in the darkest part of the lot and sat with my hands on the steering wheel until they hurt. The store sign glowed like it did not belong to any normal street. The windows were tinted so deep they looked painted over. I watched the door for a full minute, waiting for someone I knew to walk out and ruin the whole thing. Nobody came. That should have made it easier. It made it worse. It felt like I was walking into a place that did not exist until I stepped inside. When I opened the door, a bell made a small sound that seemed too loud. Warm air hit my face, heavy with old carpet and cheap plastic. The lights were bright and flat. The shelves were lined with covers that showed too much skin and too many smiles that did not reach the eyes. There were a couple of customers, but they stayed in their own corners like they had learned not to look at anyone. I kept my head down, but I still scanned faces in the reflections of glass cases. I pictured someone from work, a neighbor, a friend of my ex. My stomach turned so hard I almost walked back out. Instead, I went to the counter. The cashier stood behind it like he had stood there 1,000 nights. His expression stayed neutral, not friendly, not rude, just present. His eyes flicked up once, measured me, then waited. My throat tightened. The code phrase felt ridiculous now, like a line from a prank call. I could still buy something random, pretend I got curious and leave, but my mouth moved before my courage could catch up. I said the phrase. It came out quieter than I meant, but it landed between us like a real object. The cashier did not laugh. He did not ask me to repeat it. He did not show surprise. His face did not change at all, and that calm response hit me harder than any reaction could have. It meant I was not special. It meant I was not the first. It meant the rumor had never been a rumor. He nodded once, like I had asked for a specific brand behind the counter. Then he stepped out through a side gate and motioned for me to follow. My feet moved before my brain agreed. Each step felt like a signature. We walked past shelves and into a narrow hallway that looked cleaner than it should have. The noise from the store faded behind us, replaced by a low hum from overhead lights. The air back there felt cooler, almost sterile, like a waiting room. He stopped at a door with a paper sign taped across it. Closed for maintenance. The letters were bold, like a warning. Another door nearby had the same sign. The idea of two broken booths sitting side by side felt staged, like the store wanted an excuse ready for anyone who asked questions. The cashier pointed at the first door, then held out a hand with a small key. His fingers stayed steady. His face stayed blank. He looked at me like this was simple, like it was normal, like it was not a moment that could split my life into before and after. He came for a rumor. Now staff were guiding him like it was normal. I took the key. My hand shook just enough that I hoped he did not notice. The lock turned with a dry click. The door opened into a tight space with a bench and a screen already lit, as if it had been waiting. I stepped inside, and the cashier pulled the door toward me without a word. The door closed, and the last easy exit disappeared. The booth felt smaller than it looked from the doorway. The air held a warm, stale smell, like old fabric and disinfectant fighting each other. A low-screen glow painted the walls blue, and the sound from the video stayed turned down, just enough to make it impossible to ignore. I stood with my back to the door, listening for footsteps in the hall, half expecting the cashier to open it again and tell me there had been a mistake. No one came. I faced the screen and tried to breathe slow, like I could turn my body into something calm by force. The video played on a loop, bodies moving without faces, like it was designed to erase the human part first. I told myself I had chosen this because it was supposed to be simple. No talking, no dadding, no rejection. But the quiet made it feel serious, like the room wanted my full attention and would not let me pretend it was a joke anymore. Then I noticed the wall. To the right of the screen, a panel looked slightly different, a seam that did not match the rest. And there, centered at a height that made my stomach drop, was the opening. It was not covered. It was not hidden behind anything. It was just there, plain and permanent. The edges looked worn and wiped down too many times. That detail did something to me. It proved other people had stood exactly where I stood, with the same choice hanging in front of them. My mouth went dry. I took one step closer and immediately felt the urge to look through. It was instinct, like checking a rearview mirror. If I could see the other person, I could judge the risk. Age, size, anything. But the thought of locking eyes with a stranger through that hole made my chest tighten. If I saw a face, it would stop being anonymous. It would become a memory with a person attached. And if that person was someone I recognized, I would never be able to erase it. My mind snapped to the question I had been dodging since I left my apartment. What if it was a man? The idea landed heavy, not because I hated it, but because it threatened the story I had always told about myself. Straight, normal, simple. I had spent my whole life using those words like a fence. In that booth, the fence felt thin. It felt like it had been built for other people, not for a night like this. I hated that I cared so much. I hated that the not knowing was part of the deal. I looked at the door again, the lock, the narrow gap at the bottom where the hallway light leaked in. Outside that door, it was still a store, a counter, a bell, a cashier who would ring someone up for a magazine like it was nothing. Inside, it felt like I had stepped into a place that only existed for secrets. My breathing sounded loud, and I wondered if the person on the other side could hear it. That thought made my hands shake. I tried to bargain with myself. I told myself I could just stand there for a minute and leave. I told myself I could treat it like proof, like confirming a rumor. I could go back out, drive home, and at least I would know the place was real. But my body did not feel like it was here to verify anything. It felt hungry and scared at the same time, like relief and panic had tied themselves together. I kept thinking about risk, about disease, about how careless this was. The internet had made it sound casual, free, harmless fun. In the booth, it felt different. It felt like a door that only swung one way. I pictured myself weeks later, sitting in a clinic, trying to explain how I got there. I pictured the nurse's face. I pictured my own face in the mirror afterward. The shame came early, like my brain wanted to punish me before anything even happened. And still, I did not leave. I leaned close enough to the opening that I could feel cooler air moving through it, like a breath from another room. I froze. There was a sound I could not place at first, a small shift, a subtle scrape, something careful. The silence on the other side suddenly felt crowded. Someone was there, not a maybe, not a rumor. A person inches away, separated by a thin wall and one choice I could not take back. I shut my eyes. He wanted relief, but he also wanted certainty, and he could not have both. I understood that with a sick kind of clarity. If I looked, I might get certainty and lose the ability to do it. If I did not look, I might get relief and carry the uncertainty out with me like a stain. I kept my eyes away from the opening and listened harder, trying to read a stranger by sound alone. Then the wall answered me. A tongue slid into the opening for a brief second, testing the air like it knew I was there, and I realized I was no longer alone in that small room. The tongue appeared and vanished so fast I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But the sound that followed was real, a soft, wet breath through the opening, patient, like the wall had waited for me to stop pretending. I stood there with my hands at my sides, staring at the wall around the hole instead of the hole itself. My heart beat so hard it made my ears ring. I told myself I was not going to do it. I told myself I only came to confirm the rumor. I told myself I could still unlock the door, walk out, and never come back. But my body did not listen to my words. It listened to the fact that someone was there, close enough to touch me, and willing. A thought flashed through my head, sharp and ugly. If I looked and it was someone I did not want, I would have to admit what I was doing. If I did not look, I could keep the lie that this was not real, that it was only a strange service happening through a wall. No faces, no names, no proof. This was the point of no return. I chose not to know. I took a half step back, then forward again like my feet could not agree. My fingers went to my belt on their own. The buckle clicked, loud in the small room. I winced and froze, waiting for a knock on the door, waiting for the hallway to fill with voices, waiting for the cashier to come back and catch me mid-mistake. Nothing happened. The screen kept playing. The fluorescent hum stayed steady. The store on the other side of the hallway kept being a store, as if the booth was sealed off from normal life. I swallowed hard. My hands moved with an awkward, careful speed like I was disarming something. I kept my eyes up, fixed on the blank part of the wall, refusing the instinct to glance through the opening. Every second I delayed felt like torture, but every second closer felt worse. Then I leaned in. The hole looked darker up close, not black but deep, like a small tunnel into someone else's privacy. I could feel cooler air from the other side, and a faint smell that was not mine. The person there shifted again, close enough that the movement changed the airflow. It made the hair on my arms lift. I paused with my face turned away, breathing through my mouth so I would not smell too much. The fear in me tried one last time to take control. It reminded me of disease, cameras, being recognized. It reminded me that I did not know if the other person was a man or older or someone I would hate myself for being near. And then another thought crushed all the others. I had already walked into the store. I had already said the phrase. I had already taken the key. I had already locked myself into a room with a hole in the wall. If I backed out now, I would still carry the shame. I would still drive home alone. I would still lie awake with my body aching and my mind racing. I would have all the risk in my head with none of the relief. So I did it. I guided myself toward the opening and placed part of me through, shaking so badly I had to steady my hand on the wall. The contact of the rough edge against my skin made everything feel painfully real. My stomach tightened, and I almost pulled back. Then the other side responded. A hand reached through, not grabbing but sure, like it had done this before and knew the boundary. Something slick and cold touched me, then spread, making the movement easier. I sucked in a breath so sharply it hurt. My knees went weak, and I had to brace myself against the wall with my palm flat, pretending I was standing steady. The hand adjusted, testing pressure, reading my reaction like a language. There was no voice, no laughter, no name. Just touch, confident and controlled, coming from someone I refused to see. My fear did not disappear. It changed shape. It turned into pure sensation, and it hit me so fast my thoughts broke apart. I realized with a sudden rush of heat that the wall was not just hiding the other person from me. It was hiding me from myself. And as the steady rhythm began, I understood I had crossed into something I could not take back, even if I left the booth in 10 minutes like nothing happened. At first the touch stayed cautious, like the person on the other side had been listening to my breathing and did not want to scare me off. The hand moved in slow tests, pressure changing in small steps. Each time I flinched, it eased up. Each time I leaned in without pulling away, it grew steadier. That control made my skin prickle. It felt practiced. It felt like I was not the first man to stand in that exact spot and try not to think. I kept my forehead near the wall, eyes fixed on a crack in the paint. The screen behind me kept playing, faces and bodies flashing in blue light, but it all felt far away. The real world had shrunk to a rectangle of wall, a small opening, and the fact that someone I could not see was handling me like an object they had chosen. My shame tried to return, but it could not find space. The room was too tight. The moment was too immediate. My thoughts became simple and stupid. Do not look. Do not speak. Do not move too much. Just take it. The person's hand slipped away for a second and I froze, convinced it was over. Then something else replaced it. The contact changed from controlled pressure to something softer and closer. It was not just touch anymore. It was attention. It felt personal in a way that made no sense because there was no face, no voice, no name. Just a wall and someone who somehow knew what they were doing. I swallowed hard and held my breath, then let it out in a shaking exhale. My knees trembled. I pressed my palm against the wall to keep from stepping back. I did not want to step back. That was the truth that scared me most. Seconds stretched, then minutes. Time did not move normally in that booth. The outside world, the parking lot, the cashier, my car, all of it felt like a different life. Inside, I measured everything by sensation and sound. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the low audio from the screen, the small movements on the other side of the wall, like someone adjusting their stance, staying comfortable, staying committed. There was something almost frightening about how smoothly it continued. No awkwardness, no hesitation, no sign that they felt nervous. They did not treat it like a joke. They treated it like a routine they were good at, and that confidence pulled me under. I had expected it to be dirty and rushed. I had expected it to feel mechanical. Instead, it felt focused, like the other person had paid close attention to every reaction my body gave them. I hated how much I liked that. I hated how quickly my fear turned into need. I realized with a strange jolt that it was the best I had ever felt in my life, not because of romance, not because of connection, because there was nothing to manage, nothing to perform, no expectations except to stay quiet and let it happen. He wanted a quick escape from loneliness. Now he was overwhelmed. The rhythm grew faster in small changes, like turning a dial. My breathing got loud, and I tried to swallow the sounds back down, terrified someone in the hallway would hear me. I kept my head turned away from the opening, but my body leaned toward it anyway, chasing the sensation like it was the only thing that mattered. I started to lose control of my legs. I shifted my weight, bracing harder against the wall. My stomach tightened. Heat climbed up my chest and into my face. The point of no return crept closer, and a new panic rose with it. Because finishing meant it would end. Finishing meant I would have to pull back and stand there again in the stale air with my thoughts. It meant I would have to remember where I was and what I had done. It meant the shame would come running back the second the pleasure stopped. I remembered what I had read online about etiquette, like it was a rule that could keep this from turning into chaos. When I felt myself close, I lifted my fist and knocked on the wall, 2 quick taps that sounded too loud in the booth. I held my breath and waited. And on the other side, the reaction came immediately. The reaction on the other side came fast and decisive. The pace changed, firmer and more focused, like they had understood my signal and decided to take control of the ending. My body tightened up so hard my hands slid on the wall. I tried to stay quiet, but my breath broke into short sounds I could not hold back. For a few seconds I had no thoughts at all. There was only pressure and heat, and the helpless feeling of being handled through a wall by someone I refused to see. The booth seemed to tilt, like the floor had shifted under me. Then I finished. It hit me in a sharp wave that made my knees buckle. I pressed my forehead against the wall and shut my eyes, not from pleasure anymore, but from the sudden fear of what I had just done. My heart hammered like I had been running. My skin went cold, then hot again, like my body did not know which state to choose. The other side did not stop immediately. It continued for a brief moment, as if they wanted to make sure it was complete, or as if they enjoyed having that last bit of control. That extra second felt strange. Not violent, not wrong, just final, like a period at the end of a sentence I could not edit. Then it ended with a small gesture I could not translate. A gentle, almost casual release, like a hand letting go of something that had never belonged to it in the first place. I pulled back. The air in my booth felt different the moment I withdrew, like the room had been holding its breath with me and had finally exhaled. I stood there with my pants still open, staring at the wall around the hole as if it might explain what happened. The screen kept playing behind me, still showing bodies that did not matter. The fluorescent hum kept going, indifferent. The pleasure faded quickly, and in the space it left, questions rushed in. What if there had been a camera? What if the other person had been someone I knew? What if I had just exposed myself to something I would regret for months? What if the person on the other side had been a man, and I had crossed a line I could not uncross? My brain tried to label it and file it away, but nothing fit cleanly. It was too real to be a fantasy and too anonymous to be a memory with edges. I wiped my hands on my jeans like that could erase the feeling. I listened for movement on the other side of the wall. I heard nothing. That silence made it worse. It meant the stranger could already be walking away, already back in the normal part of the world, while I stayed trapped in the aftermath. I forced myself to breathe evenly. I zipped up with shaking fingers. I checked my reflection in the dark screen for a second, looking for any sign that I looked different, like I had been marked. I unlocked the booth door and opened it a crack. The hallway light spilled in, bright and ordinary. No alarms, no angry voices, just the same quiet hum and the sense that everything outside had continued without me. I stepped out and locked the door behind me like I was supposed to, like I belonged there. As I walked back down the hallway, my legs felt weak, and my face felt too warm. I practiced a neutral expression, the one people wore in elevators. I tried to look like a man who had simply browsed and changed his mind. The pleasure ended, the questions began. Then I reached the counter, and I met the cashier's eyes again. The cashier looked up as I came out of the hallway, and his face stayed as neutral as it had been when I walked in. No raised eyebrows, no smirk, no look that said he knew what I had just done behind the maintenance sign. He just watched me approach like I was any other customer who had wandered too far into the back. That calm almost broke me. My mind kept searching his eyes for a signal, a judgment, a warning, anything that would match the loud panic in my chest. But he acted like nothing important had happened, and that contrast made the whole experience feel even more unreal, like I had stepped into a hidden routine that ran every night without anyone acknowledging it. I held the key out and kept my hand steady through force. My fingers felt numb, like they belonged to someone else. The cashier took it without touching my skin, quick and practiced, and set it down like it was a normal exchange. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask if I needed anything. He did not even ask if it worked. It was the kind of professional silence that gave me no place to hide. I tried to say something casual, thanks, have a good night, something normal. My throat tightened and the words came out thin. The cashier nodded again, the same simple nod from earlier, like he had checked a box in his head and moved on. I turned away too fast. As I walked past the shelves, the store felt brighter than it had when I entered. The covers on the walls seemed louder, more obvious, like they were watching me. I could not tell if the other customers had glanced at me, but I felt exposed anyway. It was not rational. It was the feeling that everyone could smell what had happened, that it clung to me like smoke. Nothing dramatic happened outside. That made it feel even stranger. The front door opened with the same small bell, and cold air hit my face. The parking lot lights looked harsh and white. Cars passed on the road, ordinary and indifferent, and I felt a sudden anger at how normal the world stayed. I had crossed a line in my head and the street did not care. I got to my car and sat with both hands on the wheel again. The relief was there, low and heavy, because my body had gotten what it wanted. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like a quiet payment I had accepted for something I could not name. I tried to justify it the way I had justified the idea online. I had been alone. My divorce had been final for months. Valentine's Day had turned into a long night with nobody to touch and nobody to talk to. I had not had sex in almost a year, and loneliness had started to feel like pressure inside my skin. I told myself it was only a physical act. I told myself it meant nothing. Then the doubt hit again. I did not know who had been on the other side. I had chosen not to look. I had chosen the easiest version of the moment, and now my brain demanded the hardest answers. Was it a man? Was it someone older? Was it someone risky? My thoughts spiraled, grabbing at stereotypes and fears. Each one made my stomach turn. I started the car and drove home with the radio off. Every red light gave me time to picture that wall again. Not the act itself, but the fact that I had wanted it badly enough to do it without certainty. The shame did not come from pleasure. It came from how little I had needed to be convinced. By the time I reached my place, the relief had faded into a thin, nervous energy. I washed my hands too long. I checked my phone without knowing why. I stood in my kitchen under bright light and finally understood what I had really bought with that anonymity. At home, the biggest fear was not who it was what I might have caught. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, and I did the one thing I always did when I felt cornered. I threw the story into the internet and waited for strangers to tell me what it meant. I typed it fast, like if I got it out of my body and into words, it would stop crawling around in my chest. I kept details vague enough to protect myself, but specific enough that people would understand the situation. The post went up and for a minute nothing happened. That silence felt like the hallway outside the booth. Quiet, ordinary, and full of things I could not see. Then the first replies hit, and I refreshed the page like it was a heart monitor. One group came in hard and practical. They acted like fear was a useless emotion and I had a checklist to follow. They said I needed to get tested, and they said it like it was the only adult response. They reminded me that anonymous sex meant unknown exposure, and unknown exposure meant I could not assume I was fine. They talked about timing, about how some tests mattered sooner and some mattered later. They told me not to panic, but they also told me not to hide. Their tone did not feel cruel. It felt like someone grabbing my shoulders and turning me toward a bright light I did not want to look at. I hated them at first because they made it real, but after a few minutes their bluntness started to calm me. They were not asking why I did it. They were telling me what to do next. Action instead of spiraling. I clung to that. Another camp treated the whole thing like a safety lesson. They wrote like instructors, like this was a common situation, and I had simply skipped the rules. They listed ways to reduce risk if I ever did something like that again. They talked about barriers and boundaries, about not making contact with unknown fluids, about deciding what was acceptable before stepping into a room like that. They said anonymity was the point, but that did not mean I had to abandon basic safety. Reading those comments made my skin crawl because part of me did not want to imagine a next time, but another part of me read them slowly, as if I was storing the information away. That frightened me more than any warning did. It meant the experience had not just happened to me. It had opened a door, and my brain had started to map the room on the other side. A third group surprised me. They did not focus on the act. They focused on the loneliness. They said I sounded like someone who had been isolated for too long and tried to medicate it with something fast. They told me not to punish myself forever. They reminded me that divorce did not just end a marriage. It shredded routines and identity and safety. They said pleasure did not erase the progress I had made rebuilding my life. They told me to take care of myself emotionally, not only physically. Those comments hit a nerve. Kindness made me feel exposed in a different way. Fear and shame at least felt familiar. Compassion felt like a hand touching a bruise. But the page kept moving, and not everyone was kind. A fourth camp showed up that treated me like a problem to solve with a label. They did not ask how I felt. They told me what I was. They said the act meant I had crossed into a different category, and they argued about which one. The certainty in their words made my stomach turn. I had lived inside certainty for years. In one night I had stepped outside it. Watching strangers try to shove me back into a box felt violent, even when they meant it as acceptance. A fifth camp came in with moral disgust. They talked like my shame was deserved and overdue. They wrote as if this was not about health or loneliness, but about character. They implied I was broken, dirty, weak, and they did it with a confidence that made me feel 12 years old again. Those were the comments I read twice, even though I did not want to, like I needed to confirm the punishment. And then there was a sixth camp that made my blood run cold for a different reason. They warned me about hidden cameras, about people being recorded, about the risk of being identified later. They suggested it could have been a setup, a prank, even law enforcement. Most of it sounded dramatic, but once the thought existed, it was hard to kill. I pictured the hole again, not as an opening for pleasure, but as a trap I had leaned into. I kept refreshing. I kept picking out the comments that soothed me and rereading them like prayers. Then I would scroll a little too far and hit another one that made my hands sweat. Online, the story stopped being mine. Everyone tried to define it for me. I told myself I only needed practical advice, testing, timing, next steps. But each time I saw someone insist they knew what the experience said about me, my chest tightened. Because the biggest battle online was not health. It was identity. The longer I read, the more it felt like the comment section had turned into a courtroom. Not for what I did, for what I was. I had posted because I felt anxious about risk and shame, but strangers kept circling one detail like it was the only thing that mattered. Who was on the other side? A camp formed that pushed the simplest conclusion with the confidence of people who loved simple answers. They said it was probably a man. They said most people who used those setups were men, and I should stop pretending there was a 50-50 chance. They said if I could not handle that idea, I should never do it again. They framed it as realism, like I was being childish for not admitting what I had likely chosen. I felt defensive when I read that. My first instinct was to argue even though I had no evidence. I had nothing but a memory of a tongue and a hand, and that was the whole problem. But their blunt certainty also created a strange relief. If it was probably a man, then my anxiety had a shape. It was not an endless fog anymore. It was a single, hard object sitting in my stomach. Then the next wave came, and it pulled me in the opposite direction. Another camp insisted that labels did not own me. They said one act did not define orientation. They said behavior and identity did not always match in a clean way. They pointed out that I had not been attracted to a face or a personality. I had been attracted to the anonymity and the release, to the fact that I did not have to be known. They told me to focus on what I wanted in that moment, comfort and connection and relief, and not force it into a permanent story about myself. That softer framing lowered my panic for a minute. It gave me permission to breathe. But it also made me angry because it was too gentle. It felt like a blanket over a fire. I wanted a clear answer. I wanted to know if I had changed, or if I had simply acted out a desperate impulse. I realized I was not just afraid of being gay or bi. I was afraid of being seen as confused. I imagined my friends hearing the story and watching their faces change. I imagined them deciding they had always suspected something. I imagined my ex finding out and using it as proof that the marriage had been doomed from the start. I hated that I cared, but I cared. The thread kept moving, and then it got darker in a different way. A third camp focused on consent and ethics. They said anonymous setups could get messy because expectations were not always clear. They said rules mattered, and that anonymity could blur boundaries if anyone felt pressured, misled, or unsafe. They questioned whether the code phrase and the maintenance sign were a responsible way to run something like that. They asked what I would have done if the other person had tried to push further, if they had refused to stop, if I had panicked and could not back out without exposing myself. That made me sit up straighter on my couch. My body had enjoyed the experience, but my mind replayed the vulnerability like a threat. I had been alone in a locked booth with my pants open, with my body through a wall, and no real way to control what happened on the other side besides pulling back fast. I had treated the whole thing like a harmless secret, but those comments forced me to see the risk in a new way. Suddenly, the thread was not just about health and labels. It was a moral debate. People argued like they were arguing about a crime scene. Some blamed me for being reckless. Some blamed the store for enabling it. Some blamed the culture that made loneliness feel like a problem to hide. I kept refreshing anyway. To some people, it was a joke. To me, it felt like a verdict. Then I noticed a private message in my inbox. It was short and blunt. The sender said he was gay. He said I was spiraling because I wanted a label to either punish me or excuse me. He told me the act did not automatically define me. He told me that plenty of people did things when they were lonely that did not turn into their identity. He said I could be straight and still have done it. I could be bi and still not owe anyone an announcement. The point, he said, was that I was a human being, not a headline. I stared at that message longer than I stared at any comment. It did not erase the shame, but it separated it from panic. It made the whole experience feel less like a stain and more like a moment I had to process. It also made me realize something else, something I had avoided since I left the store. No amount of strangers debating my identity could change the fact that I remembered it clearly. The wall, the hole, the way I chose not to look, the way my body leaned in any way. When the comments finally slowed and the page stopped jumping every time I refreshed, the silence returned. It felt heavier now because I had filled it with other people's opinions. I locked my phone and sat there in the dark with my own breathing. And one question rose above all the others, quiet and persistent. What did I do with this memory? After I locked my phone, the room felt too quiet. The comments stopped scrolling, but the feeling did not stop. My body had already taken what it wanted. My mind kept reaching back into that booth like it was trying to pull out proof. Here is what I knew. I had gone in there for relief. I had gotten it, but I had also traded for something I could not hold in my hands: uncertainty. Not knowing who was on the other side had been the whole point. That had been the agreement. No names, no faces, no conversation. I had chosen that on purpose because I did not want rejection and I did not want the work of intimacy. But once I was home, not knowing stopped feeling like freedom. It started feeling like a loose wire in the wall, something that could spark later when I least expected it. I tried to separate the parts of it in my head. There was loneliness, real loneliness. The kind that sat next to me on a holiday and did not leave. There was frustration, too, the simple physical pressure of being touch-starved for months. And then there was shame, which always arrived afterward, like a bill I could never pay on time. The hardest part was identity. People online acted like identity was a stamp. One act, one label, case closed. I did not feel stamped. I felt cracked open. I kept asking myself if I had wanted the person or if I had wanted the setup. I kept replaying the moment I refused to look. That refusal mattered more than the act itself. It meant I had wanted the boundary more than I wanted the truth. At some point, I stopped pretending there was an innocent answer that would make me feel clean. If I had to guess, it had most likely been a man on the other side. Statistically, that made sense. The confidence of the other person also made sense in that context. I did not say that because I wanted to punish myself. I said it because the denial had started to feel like another kind of fear. Admitting it did not solve anything, but it made the problem honest. Then the health fear returned, steady and cold. It did not matter what label fit me if I ended up sick because I had been reckless. That was the part I could control. I could not control who the person was, but I could control what I did next. So I decided I would get tested. Even saying it in my head made me feel exposed. It meant making an appointment. It meant sitting in a waiting room and answering questions. It meant living through the time between tests and results, when every normal sensation in my body could turn into panic. But doing nothing felt worse. Doing nothing felt like accepting that I deserved whatever happened. I also admitted something else, quietly to myself. I did not know if I would ever do it again. Part of me wanted to swear I would not, just to feel strong. Another part of me remembered how fast I had gone from curiosity to action. That scared me. It made me realize this was not only about sex. It was about how I handled emptiness. If I felt lonely again, would I chase the same kind of numb comfort? Would I choose secrecy over connection because it was easier? I tried to set a boundary that was simple enough to keep. I told myself I would not go back when I felt desperate. I told myself I would not use anonymous risk as a substitute for real closeness. I did not know if I could keep that promise, but I knew I had to say it out loud inside my own head. In the end, I accepted the only honest conclusion I had. I would cope. I would take care of my health. I would sit with the discomfort instead of trying to erase it with a new story. And I wanted to ask you something, because the internet had turned my night into a debate. If you were alone after a divorce and you did something anonymous for comfort, how would you balance loneliness, safety, and identity labels afterward? Which camp would you listen to? The health-first realists, the safety and boundaries crowd, the shame reduction supporters, or the people who pushed labels? And what safer coping steps would you recommend to someone who felt as lost as I did? The act was over, but the meaning still felt unanswered.